This week on Catholic Pour Over.
To realize how much a physical hunger affects my experience of receiving the Lord in the Eucharist is so beautiful.
Mother Natalia, welcome to the show, Mother.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about fasting since Lent is coming up. And I used to pick on Mother Natalia's order because they would fast not only during Lent, but throughout the year. And as it turns out, in my humility, I was able to acknowledge my deficiency, and I've picked up on some fasting throughout the year. So Maria and I said, we should do a show on fasting, and let's bring in someone who's practiced it quite a bit. And so welcome to the show, Mother Natalia.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your order? Because maybe people don't know anything about you or the Bridegroom Monastery.
Sure. So I'll start by saying it's not an order. So I'll give you that correction there.
Thank you, Mother, for correcting me.
Because since you are so humble in acknowledging when you've made a mistake.
I've made a mistake. Mea culpa.
Yeah. So the only reason is because an order is someone who it's a community that follows a specific rule of a particular, a rule that's been written. So like the Franciscans follow the rule of St. Francis. The Jesuits follow the rule of St. Ignatius, so on and so forth. And that's not the same in the Eastern tradition. So we are Byzantine Catholic, Eastern Catholic. And the Eastern tradition is that each monastery develops its own rule of life when it begins. So our rule is based on the rule of St. Basil and St. Pachomius and St. Benedict and things like that. But it's our own rule. We don't follow a particular rule. So we're not an order.
I got that the first time you said it.
Okay. But you said it wrong the first time, so
Right.
I just want to make sure that you're really sure now.
Thank you,
okay.
Mother. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
God bless you.
So, yes, thank you. Byzantine Catholic community. Our community started in 2009 in response to the bishop at the time of our eparchy, our diocese, he was responding to the apostolic letter that St. John Paul II wrote, Orientale Lumen, calling for a revitalization of Eastern Catholic monasteries. And the bishop at the time in 2009 said, I want this in our eparchy. And our community started in response to that. So I've been there for just over 10 years now. I met Father Damian before I entered, actually, when I was discerning with the community. And I don't know. What else do you want to know? Anything?
I would want to know. So why Christ the Bridegroom?
Oh, that's a great question. We don't often get that, actually. It was on the heart of the two women who started the community, and but it's in reference to, we have during Great and Holy Week, which will be coming up, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks from the time this comes out. In Great and Holy Week, the first 3 days of Holy Week, we call the days of the bridegroom. And so we have a particular devotion those 3 days, Great and Holy Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, to Christ the Bridegroom. So there are particular hymns that are sung, and there's an icon of Christ the Bridegroom, which is showing him with the instruments of the Passion, and his hands are tied, his hands are bound in reference to his crucifixion being his self-gift in his spousal relationship with the church.
Now, the subtitle of our podcast is What's Percolating in the Land and Beyond. So certainly we have viewers and listeners who are from the greater Cleveland area, but we have people outside too. And we are Roman Catholics, part of the Diocese of Cleveland. You are a Ruthenian Catholic who is part of the eparchy of Parma.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another Eastern church in Parma, which is the Ukrainian Catholics. And sometimes people confuse those. They just say Byzantine generally, but there's a distinction there. There's also Maronite Catholics. There's Melkite Catholics. So is it 23 or 22?
I think that's right,
Yeah.
churches. But there are, so some of those the reason people confuse us with the Ukrainians, I think sometimes, is because we are both Byzantine.
Right.
Yes, the Byzantine rite. And so, but then there are several churches under the umbrella of Byzantine rite. So the rite is short for ritual, basically, or
Yep.
it's coming from the same root as ritual. So the rite references the kind of liturgy we celebrate. So the Ukrainian Catholics, the Ruthenian Catholics, all Byzantine Catholics use the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the liturgy of St. Basil, whereas some of the other rites, like the Ambrosian rite, wouldn't use that same liturgy.
All right, well, let's get down to it. So, as I mentioned at the front of the show, I used to pick on you and your sisters because there'd be times I'd come over and visit the monastery. Have you been there, Maria?
I have not yet. No.
Oh, well,
I know.
you should go.
I know.
And you could pray Vespers with the sisters, and then maybe, if you're blessed, maybe you can join them after for some community time. But sometimes during this community time, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to, eat a steak or have some chicken, and then they can't eat anything. They eat like a bowl of sand. No, that's an exaggeration. But you do some serious fasting throughout the year. So could you talk about that and why you do that and the importance of fasting in general?
Those are big questions.
I know. It's Catholic pour over. We're pouring over big ideas.
Yeah, great. So, when you mentioned before recording that, you were like, and you can touch on the history of fasting. And I'm like, I don't know anything about the history of fasting, so we'll see what comes out of my mouth. But there's the publican who fasted twice a week, but we're supposed to not be like the publican. Sorry, the Pharisee. The Pharisee fasted twice a week. But that obviously doesn't mean we're not supposed to fast. So the Byzantine tradition, our typical fast is from, our strict fast is from meat, dairy, and eggs. And then there's additional fasting. So during the Great Fast, during Lent, in addition to those, we also don't have wine or cooking oil, or fish with a backbone. But we're allowed to have wine and oil on the weekends. And in our monastery, we also don't drink wine throughout the entirety of the fast as an additional thing. But we can have oil on the weekends, which makes salad very exciting when you get to the weekend, because you can have dressing with oil.
What would be a fish without a backbone?
Yeah, you're right. That was imprecise language. I guess what I mean is we can't have seafood with a backbone.
Oh.
So we could have shrimp.
Or an eel or a scallop.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Or a sponge.
Yes. We wouldn't have scallops typically because that would be very expensive and not so much on the poverty part.
I was just racking my brain for seafood without backbone.
Yeah, they exist. Crab. Is that true? That's true.
Yeah, they're just in a shell.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, regarding the history of fasting, I think a lot of it, which this is just true of a lot of our Christian traditions in general, come from certain pagan traditions that we've Christianized, right? And so part of the reason I've heard why we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays in the Byzantine rite, so in addition to, the fast that I just mentioned that is during the Great Fast, we also fast every Wednesday and Friday throughout the year, except there are 4 fast-free weeks during the year. One of them we just finished. And one of the reasons I've heard that we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays is because the pagans had a fast on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So this was to distinguish, we're not pagan.
Christians
this is, but there is, to answer your question of why do we fast? What's the point of fasting? I think that's a very large question because there are lots of reasons that we fast. The first one that comes to mind is just detachment. From detachment from pleasures and also just detachment even from our own bodies in a sense, not in a sort of dualistic sort of way or something, but in a way of recognizing that we are more than the limitations of our bodies, I guess.
You mentioned the Great Fast. So do you fast the whole 40 days of Lent? Is that what you mean by the Great Fast? Okay.
We do. And it's actually, so for us, it ends up being a little bit longer. So we have 2 weeks before the Great Fast or Lent. So we start on Monday, 2 days before the Roman Catholics.
Okay.
And then 2 weeks before that, we have what's called Meat Fair week. So it's the farewell to meat. And so we eat a bunch of meat that week, and then there's no more meat. So the no meat starts a week before the fast. Okay. And then that week is called Cheese Fair. And so we just eat a bunch of dairy all week because then when the Great Fast begins, we give up dairy as well and eggs at that point. So we have some pre-Lenten Sundays to help us kind of like ease into the fast.
Okay.
And then we go without those things for the entirety of the 40 days, including weekends. And then Holy Week is a separate and more intense fast than the Great Fast.
Talk a little bit about the fact that after Jesus was baptized, the Spirit drove him out into the desert, and then he spends this time fasting. And in Lent, we do that. But if someone tried to not eat anything, it could be harmful to your health. So how do you navigate imitating our Lord and entering into these fasts so that you can be more aware of your deep spiritual hunger, but not making these fasts an idol? Because sometimes it could just be my self-discipline. I'm so strong. I didn't eat anything today. What did you eat, you pig? Or something like that. That's what you would say to me. But no, I'm just kidding. You wouldn't. But, how do you make this a spiritual practice and not fall into competition or just trying to get yourself healthy or ripped or boast to your friends in Exodus 90 that you've done this sort of thing? So how does that, because it's an easy trap to fall into. Yeah.
No, that's a really excellent question. And it's actually, that was the primary thing I had in mind coming into this podcast was I wanted to make that point because I think that's a very common mistake that people make in fasting. And it's a mistake I've made very many times in fasting is it becomes this, it's so nuanced and it's such a thin line because there's what I just said of like, we're more than the limitations of our body. And that's true. But it's also not about proving to ourselves that we're amazing and we're strong. And if we try harder, then we earn our salvation or something like that. Like that's not the point of it. Ultimately, as we become detached through fasting, the goal is that we're becoming attached to the Lord. So if we're becoming more attached to our own will through our fasting, and if we are looking at others in our fasting, then we've totally missed the point. And this is a very common saying amongst the early fathers is keep your eyes on your own plate. Like you're not looking at what other people are eating. You're not looking at how others are fasting or comparing to that. So ultimately, to answer your question of how do you avoid this trap, is it's very important that your fasting is not dictated by yourself and yourself alone. If you have a spiritual director, then that's the place to discern what type of fasting the Lord is calling you to. If you don't have a spiritual director, because I realize that's very difficult to find, and then you have a trusted friend. But it's not about just how strong I am, how willful I am. And you also need to look at the fruits of your fasting because, I brought along some quotes by St. John Chrysostom because he has some of the best quotes about fasting. And one of the things that he says is, besides fasting with your mouth, you must fast by not saying anything that could harm anyone else. After all, this is the line that we quote all the time. After all, what good is it for you to abstain from meat if you devour your brother?
Ooh.
And I love that line. What good is it? And this is from St. John Chrysostom, the Golden Mouth, who is highly revered in his preaching. And what good is it for you to abstain from meat if you devour your brother? And that's often what we're doing.
I really like your advice about like having a friend or a spiritual director give advice on this, because I think the pattern I tend to always fall into is I'm going to fast from this and this during Lent, or, try to fast my meals. But then, and what you've said about the body so far is like, I work out 4 or 5 days a week, and I know like fasting on those days is not good for me. Like I'll feel terrible. My blood sugar dropped low, or I'm nasty to my family because I'm hungry. So, but I've actually never talked about it with a spiritual director in terms of like, what is the Lord calling me to maybe this Lent of what I can abstain from that won't harm my body physically, but will have the spiritual fruitness that you've talked about growing in relationship with the Lord.
And keeping in mind that like we talk about fasting. Actually, there was this line in our Lives of the Saints last night at Vespers struck me. He said, we were talking about the life of this particular saint, and it says that he took up ascetic labors for the sake of the salvation of his soul. And I was like, that's it. That's why we fast. That's why we have the ascetic labors, for the sake of the salvation of our soul, because this is purifying to us, because the church has given us this in her wisdom, because this is good for us. Not because, which is why we need to tie it into relationship with the Lord. And we don't talk about, particularly in these fasting seasons, we don't talk about fasting apart from prayer and almsgiving. Like all three of these go together. And so if my fasting is making it such that I can't actually be present to the Lord in prayer, then there's something off there. But we also, and this is why it's slippery and why we need the advice of someone else, I think, is because we are masters of self-deception and we don't actually enjoy fasting. I kind of enjoy fasting sometimes, but I'm also somewhat of a masochist. I studied engineering physics, and you have to be a masochist to study that. But we're so self-deceptive. And so it's very easy to say, well, I'm falling asleep in prayer, so probably I just shouldn't fast, or I'm getting snippy with people, and so probably I shouldn't do this. And another example of this is we use the phrase charity over piety. And okay, I'm fasting from something, but I go to this person's house and they don't realize that it's a fasting day, and so they give me this food. Charity says I eat that, and that's true, charity over piety. However, I could also think I'm going to eat this, and tomorrow I'm going to abstain from that thing. But instead, we're just like, all right, I'll take seconds and thirds.
Just throw the whole thing out the window.
Or the other option is that you insult the person and say, I don't want to receive the charity that you're giving.
Right.
I remember being a freshman or a sophomore. It was a sophomore at Borromeo, and we went to a religious community, and it was during Lent, and I think I was not eating cookies at all. And Brother Don Lippert, who's now Bishop Don Lippert in Papua New Guinea, was there. And the sisters left, and they came back, and I said, well, they left the room. I'm like, I gave this up. He's like, just eat the cookie. Out of charity, eat the cookie. So I ate the cookie, and that was actually more of a penance for me, and I did like it, and it was very good. But he gave me permission at that time because what I was going to say was my pride was coming out and saying, I don't want to eat your cookie. I don't want to accept this hospitality. And they were so kind to offer. And that was the only thing they offered at that time. So charity always rules. Yeah. And it's not that I didn't make a serious vow that I would never eat a cookie. So in that particular situation, I was given permission from my spiritual father to eat the cookie.
And it was something of a penance for you, not only because you didn't get to do the self-righteous thing of saying, I'm not doing this right now, and but also because we so desire perfection and to do things exactly right. And I would say even we often desire perfection above holiness. We think that the point of becoming holy is to not sin, but actually the point of not sinning is to help us get to holiness. And we reverse that all the time in our minds. And I think that there's something of like, you had to complete that fast knowing I never ate cookies except there was the one time.
Right.
Like, and that's a hard death to self. And that's when it becomes not about your own will,
right?
But about community and about relationship. And
I was even thinking earlier on when you were speaking about fasting, that part of the fast is to recognize not your own strength of your will, but your need for God to do anything. And that this is really hard for me. And Lord, and maybe you do fail in that. And in that failure, you realize I can't do this on my own. So there's that aspect of it too, is to move you from self-reliance to ultimate and always relying upon the Lord.
And and I think fasting should always stretch us for that reason. You know, it's like we can all fast from the things that are easy for us to fast from, or we can. I was thinking this morning as I was working out, I was seeing this growth in myself of. I used to very much when I would work out, and I think this is the trap that we most of us fall into when we start working out is that if you're lifting weights, it's like you'll compromise form or something in order to get higher weights, right? So you can see the higher numbers and you can see that like you're stronger or something. But then what's the point actually of working out? Is the point to get the higher numbers so that you can feel good about yourself, or is the point actually for the health of your body? Because okay, I can swing my arms when I do bicep curls and that's fine. And I can lift higher weights. I'm now not engaging the bicep the whole time. And I'm not actually receiving the benefits of the thing that I'm trying to do.
Potentially hurting your back too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with fasting we might pick these really hardcore things because we want to feel good about ourselves. Not because we want to grow in detachment, not because we want relationship with the Lord, not because we want to have clarity in our prayer, because that's a very natural consequence of fasting. If we're fasting well, is this clarity of senses that comes about. And you see this because so many people in our secular society are fasting because they're realizing the benefits of it, or intermittent fasting and things like that. It's like Byzantines were doing intermittent fasting before it was cool. And because this is so much of the beauty of the church is like the things that were given by the church also just are naturally more helpful to us. And we just don't often realize that. Like we stand during basically all of our prayers. And I've just come to realize that's really helpful to me because when I'm sitting for prayer, it's harder for me to be attentive. It's easier for me to doze off. It's like, so the standing for prayers, this posture that the church gives us in the Byzantine Rite, is actually helpful for prayer. And it's the same thing with fasting. Like these fasting rules that the church gives us are meant to aid us in these other areas.
So not only at meals, but in the gym, do you keep your eye on your own plate? Because in the gym, you could compare yourself. Oh, he's got that or she's got that much weight on there. No, concern yourself with the form of what you're doing for your own health and sanctification, rather than comparing yourself all the time. And it's so easy to fall into that, I think. Oh, I got to be like him. I got to be like her. And maybe even people are watching this, listening to this. I want to be just like Mother Natalia, or I want to be like Maria. I want to be like Father Damian. I mean, be your own person and talk to the Lord about how that looks in your life, because there's universal principles here that need to be applied in particular situations in your life,
I think that often when I read the John 21, we usually think of John 21 in the passage of, this is the Peter, do you love me? Asked thrice, and feed my sheep, and so on and so forth. And then, so there's like this beautiful moment of connection between Jesus and Peter. And you can see that this is a moment between the two of them, and this moment of relationship and this moment of encounter. And then Peter says, but Lord, what about him? Talking about John, the beloved disciple. And whenever I read that, I'm just like, Peter, you lost it. You ruined the moment, and I think that's what we so often do in our own relationship with the Lord, is like, he's working on something in us and we're with him in it. And then we're like, but wait, they're lifting more weights than me. But wait, or the opposite, right? Like, I'm lifting more than them. I must be doing fine. I don't need to keep stretching.
I have a follow-up question. So we've used the term fasting, abstaining for maybe someone like prayerfully discerning what they're being called to this Lent. What are maybe some baby steps or some entry points into even the distinction between fasting and abstaining, and what everything we're talking about here? Was it all encompassing?
Well, the first thing, I don't remember this distinction because we don't make this distinction as much. So correct me if I'm wrong on this, Father Damian, but I believe abstaining is abstaining from particular foods and fasting is not eating.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So abstaining during Lent on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Well, no, there's fasting. That's 2 small meals and one regular size meal, and then or abstaining from meat every Friday, but fasting would be fasting from food.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everyone who's able to start with what the church prescribes. So exactly what Father Damian just said, as far as abstaining and fasting, what the church provides is always a good place to start. I'll also take this moment to remind all of those Roman Catholics who maybe don't remember this, that you are actually supposed to abstain from something on Fridays throughout the year.
A penance on Friday, yeah.
Some sort of penance. And I think it's like, meat. And if not meat, then something else. It's not just anyways. So I would say, starting with the prescriptions of the church, something I would encourage people to do, if you are able to do this without devouring your neighbor, is to stretch yourself in how you are fasting before communion. Because this is something that I have found. So our practice is to fast if we're physically able, and some of the nuns even are not. So this is not like, well, you're not holy if you don't do this. There are plenty of holy nuns in our monastery who can't do this, but we practice the tradition of fasting from midnight until receiving communion. So throughout the Great Fast, there are services, Eucharistic services that we have in the late afternoon, and we don't eat until after that service. So we eat our first meal as dinner or supper. And that has been such a beautiful experience for me. Like, to realize how much a physical hunger affects my experience of receiving the Lord in the Eucharist is so beautiful. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to try fasting from midnight until dinner every day. And I'm talking specifically about the Eucharist. So usually if you go to a 10 a.m. Mass on Sunday and you just fast for an hour before, I'm recommending maybe you try, if you're capable of it, fasting from the time you wake up until after receiving communion on that Sunday, and like increase that practice during Lent.
I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, I'm a cradle Catholic. I've never heard of that until like recently, that was a practice.
And that used to be the same before the Second Vatican Council.
Yeah.
Even water.
Yeah.
And which we drink water, and I drink coffee.
Yeah.
But because I'm not charitable, if I don't drink coffee, I devour everyone. But yeah, that's something I would definitely encourage people to start with, is in some way during this fasting season, stretch yourself as you can in fasting before the Eucharist, whether that's increasing the fast by an hour or by whatever. The other thing I would recommend is just, actually, and this should have even been the first thing, is this needs to be a discernment with the Lord when it's above the prescriptions of the church. Again, like, do what the church is prescribing. Beyond that, open this up in prayer to the Lord and see what he's speaking to your heart. And I would encourage people to pray with how, again, the prayer, fasting, and almsgiving can go together. Because maybe it's, I'm going to fast from my Starbucks coffee twice a week, and the money I would have spent on Starbucks, I'm instead going to donate to Christ the Bridegroom Monastery. Or maybe it's, I'm going to fast from lunch every day, and instead of being in lunch, I'm going to go to daily mass during my lunch hour.
And there's a daily mass at the cathedral at noon every day.
I like that we both just had a little plug.
Yeah.
That was not planned. Anyways, so those would be my two, I think, takeaways and tips in preparing for Lent this year. Is I would encourage you to try to stretch your fasting before communion and just see what that experience is like, because it's been very beautiful for me. And pray about how prayer, fasting, and almsgiving can tie together for you. And doing that with the other two aspects as well. Like, how can you give alms in a way that's related to fasting and prayer?
I think that folds in nicely what you were saying earlier about detachment, and that fasting is for us to detach. And the Starbucks example is a great example of the comforts we get used to. How attached are we to those? Could we actually give them up?
Yeah.
And as St. Augustine would say, if you're not hungry, you're really not going to enjoy a meal. If you're not thirsty, you're not even going to enjoy a glass of water. So ultimately, this is not masochistic, or it's not self-punishing. It's not because these things are bad. It's because they're good, but there's even a greater good, and that greater good is God, and our relationship with him, especially during this time of Lent, can develop, it can deepen, it can mature. And so taking a risk and trying something that may be a little challenging or hard can go a long, long way. Anything that's important is always going to be a little difficult and hard, right?
If it's easy, it doesn't change you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mother Natalia, you also have your own podcast. It's called What God Is Not, right?
Correct.
You're on Spotify, Apple. Sometimes you pop up in my YouTube feed, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you could find Mother Natalia there. We thank you for being our guest on this show. And you're only our second guest. We had Matt Maher and Sarah Kroger on once, but we've never had a guest in this studio. They were playing a show at the cathedral, so we set up a little studio in the rectory. But
So I'm your third guest.
yeah, you're our second episode with a guest, but our third guest.
Okay.
Because philosophers like to make distinctions. So, well, thank you for being on the show. We hope you enjoyed this. We hope this helps you out with your Lent.
Yeah, giving you a little food for thought and going into Lent.
Very clever.